It's Monday. Thank you for taking time just to join us devotionally as we look at the last steps of Jesus each day of his final week leading up to the cross. I'd like to just have a Bible in one hand and then to just take a thought and to give to you every day just something that God can use to stir your heart into thinking about him and the meaning of the cross. So I'm going to try to stick with the gospel mark. I'll do that almost every day with the exception of one. At least that's the plan. But for our purposes today, I want us to look at what Jesus was doing on that Monday and to point something out for us. In Mark chapter 11, the Bible says that the Lord had gone to the temple. He was already in the city. And an amazing thing is, as we were celebrating yesterday as being Palm Sunday, the Lord had visited the temple, and Mark's gospel said that he went to the temple courts. He looked around, and he was looking at everything. And because it was already late, he went back to Bethany with his disciples. Well, the next day, which would be Monday, he's on his way back to the temple. And here's the key to this whole passage. It's the fig tree. And when you're reading the Gospel of Mark in particular, he does this often. He will introduce a story with a theme that he'll bring around on the back end of the story. And at first look, it seems like those two stories are disconnected. So here's what I mean. This fig tree introduces for us Jesus going into the temple. But as Jesus is leaving the temple, he says something about the fig tree again. And what is it about the fig tree that helps us to understand what Jesus was doing at the temple on that Monday? Well, we know that the Lord was cleansing the temple. And he was cleansing the temple because it had lacked fruit. It had just become a religious enterprise, if you will. And religion saves no one. Jesus did not come to give us another religion. Jesus was not just about religious people. Jesus was not about religious places. Jesus was coming to give us relationship. And when he goes to the temple, he has already cursed this fig tree. Now, when we talk about cursing, we're not saying the Lord was acting in the flesh. He never sinned, and he wasn't using poor language. He was literally, as the creator, he was saying that this fig tree will never bear fruit. Why is that? Well, the Bible says that as he was the next day coming along out of Bethany, he was hungry. And there in verse 13, seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, in other words, it appeared from a distance that it had borne fruit. He went to find out if it had any fruit. And when he reached it, he found nothing but leaves. And because it was not the season of figs, he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And then the Bible says his disciples heard him say this, because they're going to remind the Lord of what he has said whenever they leave the temple. But at the temple, we get a picture of Jesus that's really rare. It's what we would call a moment of righteous indignation. And I know there are times where we might talk about how we are righteously indignant over something. And I don't doubt that that can exist. But there is only one person whom we can really say was righteously indignant, and that was Jesus. He was both righteous, and he is certainly angry in a way of which God himself can be at the sin of man. And he goes into this temple knowing it represented the presence of God. This temple was for the people of God, the closest they could get to God on planet Earth. When you think of Judaism and you think of the Old Testament, at the center of the theology of Judaism was the concept of the temple. And we know that whenever Solomon built this temple, he built it with every single inch, with intentionality and beauty and the best of the land to glorify God. And this temple had precincts. It had courts to it, an outer court, an inner court. The furniture all had significance and meaning. We know there was a Holy of Holies, the Holy of Holies, where the presence of God dwelt on earth. There's a Hebrew where the Shekinah glory of God dwelled in the Holy of Holies, the one place where the high priest alone could go, one time of year. So you have to know, and I have to know, the significance of the temple was tantamount to the very presence of God for the Jewish people. Well, it was destroyed in 586 by the Babylonians, and then it was rebuilt under the leadership of Ezra, and then comes Nehemiah in that same time period building the walls. The minor prophet Haggai also encouraged God's people to rebuild the city. And so that temple, though, over the years, had kind of fallen to the wayside. Obviously, hundreds of years in existence, it needed to be reconstructed or re-beautified, fortified, if you will. Well, one of the greatest minds in the world in building was Herod the Great. He just also happened to be one of the most maniacal people also. I mean, he was a maniacal leader, but he built things that you can see to this day. If you were to go to Israel and the Holy Land, you'll see a lot of his buildings. It's an amazing ingenuity of human imagination and mind, what he was able to achieve. And it's ironic that here was Herod the Great, no believer, yet also oversaw for like 5 decades the re-beautifying, the refortification of this temple. By the time the disciples saw it, they were with Jesus, and in Mark later on, in Mark chapter 13, with exclamation marks. They say, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." Joseph the historian said this, I should say Josephus Flavius said this, that the temple was one of the great ancient wonders of the world. And when you would see it, the brilliance of the sun shining off the white stone would blind one's eyes. And the disciples were rightly taken back by this. But you know who wasn't impressed? Jesus. He wasn't impressed because that place that should have represented that presence of God had become more about commerce. People were divided. They were kept apart from God. And instead of people being let in the way God provided through the means of the sacrifices that he put into place, the people of God had rejected him. The Lord said, "Is it not written that my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers"? One thing we should know about Jesus, nobody was more full of love, more compassionate, but he was strong. I mean, he was firm, and he never wasted words, and especially when it came to the religious leaders, because he was leading the hearts of God's people astray. So today, here's what I want you to think about. When the disciples left the temple, they come across that same fig tree. And it was Peter, the Bible says, he remembered and said to Jesus there in verse 21, he says, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." And the Lord said this, "Have faith in God." Have faith in God. He talked about faith, he talked about prayer, and he talked about forgiveness. And on this day, let us remember, God is always a God who wants our hearts. He is not settling for religion. He doesn't just want outward conformity in your life to him. He wants you. He wants me, our affections. He wants our heart, our dreams, all of our sin, everything about us to live and to beat for his glory. That's what he created us for. And on this Monday, we're reminded that when we do this, we will bear fruit. And if you're in a season of your life where you have not walked with God, you feel distant from God, this is a great week, a great moment, a great day. Open your heart up to him. Say, "Lord, let me see you in a new way this Easter. Draw me back to your heart." God delights in seeing us be fruitful for his glory. Would you join us tomorrow and the rest of the week? Just a few minutes every day, just like this. And put in your heart, if you haven't made plans for Easter, this Sunday morning, 9 a.m., 10:45 a.m., a sunrise at 6 a.m., a sunrise service, I should say. I actually don't know when the sun rises. I think it's a little before this, or a little after, I should say. But we are going to have a wonderful, wonderful time celebrating who the Lord is. But let us open our heart up to him today. Thanks for joining us. Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow.